E damos agora as boas-vindas a Michael Mcqueen, palestrante multipremiado, previsor de tendências e autor de 9 livros best-seller. Michael Mcqueen já foi para algumas das marcas mais bem-sucedidas do mundo a salvação em momentos disruptivos. Já nomeado Keynote Speaker do ano na Austrália, Mcqueen pertence ao Professional Speakers Hall of Fame. O futuro da humanidade foi o tema escolhido para a palestra. Vamos então descobrir quais as tendências que Michael prevê para a humanidade.
Thank you so much, Aruta, for that introduction, and thank you to Sergio and the rest of the crew for the invitation to be able to spend just a couple of minutes with you this morning to, in many ways, set the scene, set the tone for a lot of what's going to be covered for the rest of the day. A lot of fantastic insights and panels and discussions as we turn our attention to the future. You know, what does the future of not just healthcare look like, but what is the sense of a new humanity going to be for all of us as well? And it's hard to talk about the future without referencing the immediate past and everything we've just been through over the last 2 and a bit years in the midst of this pandemic. And I think it's been interesting over the last few months. There's been a lot of commentary about the significance of COVID-19, how it's changed society and the economy. You know, certainly the role of it changing healthcare. I mean, the move toward telehealth, for instance, in ways that it's unlikely we're going to go back to the way things were. And it's interesting when we reflect on the significance of this last 2.5 years, it's hard to just overstate how much has happened. Now, to me, I think the most compelling reflection on the pandemic and the significance of this time was from some commentary I came across from this guy here, a guy named Lauren Padelford, who is a VP at Shopify in the US. And here's what Padelford said. As far as he's concerned, COVID has acted like a time machine. It brought the 2030s forward to the 2020s. And I think that is so true. I mean, as someone who's spent 18 years studying where the world's heading from a technology and demographic standpoint, there are trends that people like me thought were 5, 10, 15 years away that have materialized over the last 2 years because of this pandemic. I mean, very practically, you think about how this has played out for all of us. For instance, think about our use of QR codes. I mean, prior to the pandemic, I would not have used a QR code for, I think, 6 or 7 years. Now, it's not a new technology, it's been around since 1994, but QR codes never really reached their potential until a pandemic hit and we had to check in to restaurants and social settings everywhere we went for social distancing and social contact tracing. And what this has done is it's begun to change the way we engage with this technology, and it's also changing the way that organizations are connecting with their customers, with their marketplace, with society. And we're seeing this in the corporate world, but also in healthcare. I mean, a good example of how significant the adoption of QR codes has been was this example from last year. I don't know if you saw this in the news, when a video streaming company in China created the world's first airborne QR code. Check this out. This is 1,500 drones flying in formation in the skies above Shanghai. And this thing actually worked like a normal QR code. You could hold your phone up to the sky and scan it, and what loaded was like a marketing message for something they'd launched the day before. And of course, you look at what's happened in technology, and we've seen a lot of change in that space over the last 2.5 years. But even at a more fundamental level, societal change has been so profound. I mean, it's hard to look past just the impact of the move toward remote and hybrid work. And I don't know how much remote or hybrid work you did over the last 2.5 years. Of course, in healthcare, there are scores of professions that you just couldn't do remotely, which was sort of tricky in itself. We had all these office workers working remotely at home, but a lot of people on the front line just couldn't. And it set up a very difficult us and them situation in a lot of communities. But of course, for those of you who did a little bit of remote work, you would know that it was a massive learning curve to figure out just how to do our roles remotely, how to lead teams remotely. And this is a big challenge for a lot of my clients right now, trying to build culture with workforces that haven't actually ever really worked together in close proximity. But I love this next little video as I think a good snapshot of how much of a learning curve it was to get our heads around remote work. And some of you may have seen this video. It's one of my favorite videos from the whole pandemic. And it was of a lawyer dialing into a court case in Texas using Zoom for the first time, having no idea there was a filter turned onto his Zoom feed. Have a quick look at this video. If you haven't seen this, you'll probably enjoy it. Let's check it out.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take
we're trying to, can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I can see that.
Don't you love it? I mean, who would have ever thought the phrase, "I'm not a cat," would become a trending hashtag in 2021? But it does sort of goes to just how much has changed so quickly. So the question for all of us right now is this: what comes next? And how do we make sure we're ready for the things that lie ahead for all of us? And my encouragement to you is this: if we're going to get ready for the future in the aftermath of this pandemic, it's going to be absolutely vital that you and I focus on tides and not waves. Now, I often use this as a metaphor to describe the sort of trends we really need to be paying attention to, as opposed to the fads that can easily sort of distract us. Because I often describe fads as being like a wave at the beach. And of course, you're in a seaside or portside location right now, so hopefully this metaphor resonates with you. Like you think a wave at the beach, and a wave crashes ashore, makes a lot of noise, but then it retreats, and it doesn't leave a permanent mark. And I often refer to, those fad-like trends as being like that. Lots of noise, lots of excitement, but they actually don't really change things much. In contrast, a tide is silent. It's slower moving. I mean, it's actually easy to miss the changing of the tides if you don't know where to look. But over time, a changing tide will reshape the entire coastline. And so right now for all of us, how do we focus on those tidal trends that will change life for all of us and change healthcare over the coming few years, and not get distracted by those wave-like fads? And I want to put it to you, there are 3 tidal trends that are going to be significant for all of us, but particularly from a healthcare perspective. And I wonder if these 3 tidal trends, which is going to be the biggest one from your perspective. The first of these is going to be around the acceleration of artificial intelligence or machine learning. And we've seen this play out over the last few years in some truly extraordinary ways, but I've got to tell you, this is just the beginning. And we could probably spend like 2 hours just going deep, looking at what's happening with AI and machine learning right now. But just to pull out one example that I've been following really closely in terms of the significance of AI, is what we're seeing happen in the whole automotive and car space. I mean, for instance, what happens when AI begins to drive our cars? I don't know how many of you find the whole idea of a driverless car just a little bit nerve-wracking. I mean, a lot of us do. The interesting thing is this technology is closer to becoming a reality than most of us realize because of the pandemic. In fact, interestingly, just before the pandemic hit, I had the chance to spend a chunk of time in Silicon Valley watching this technology being trialed. Now, the technology that I got to watch in action was the stuff developed by Waymo, which is Google's driverless car spin-off company. And watching this technology in action, I was stunned at how intuitive it is, how clever this technology is. But even at that point, the people from Google were saying this is not going to be on public roads for at least another 8 or 9 years. Why? Because governments are nervous about driverless cars being on public roads with cars being driven by humans, and for good reason. And yet that changed throughout the pandemic, and most of us have no idea. In fact, one of the most significant and understated news stories of the last 2.5 years was this announcement in October 2020 that regulators in America were giving the green light for the world's first fully driverless ride-sharing service to begin operating in Phoenix, Arizona. I mean, as we speak here today, there are people getting in and out of cars in Arizona, going from point A to point B, with no human driver involved in that process at all. Now, if that seems inconceivable, I'm going to show you a video of what's happening right now in Phoenix, Arizona. As I show you this video, I want you to put yourself in this car. Imagine what it feels like to be in a vehicle where there is no one behind the wheel. Okay, you ready? Have a quick look at this.
Like, this is our ride.
It's hard to describe what it's like when you hail a car
See us?
and it pulls up with no one behind.
Heading to Costco Holes.
And along with it, what Waymo hopes is a pandemic selling point.
It's just me and the steering wheel here.
Not having to get into a car with a stranger. Those sensors are the eyes of what Waymo calls the Waymo driver, a computer that uses 19 cameras, LiDAR, and radar to see what's happening 360 degrees around the car and up to 3 football fields away.
Wow. It flagged a person that's way over there.
It's always paying attention day and night, 360 degrees. It's never drunk, it's never tired, it's never texting.
This is an experience, and it requires a little bit of trust. But Waymo says this is all the culmination of over 20 billion miles of testing, saying computer simulations consistently show their cars making more life-saving maneuvers than human drivers. But for some, it's a different kind of safety that matters most.
Wouldn't be for like COVID purposes. It would actually be more for like driving alone as a woman late at night, safety. Like that would be my go-to for it.
Waymo hoping to prove safety is its biggest selling point. Okay, we're accelerating. Even if no one's behind the wheel.
Now, don't you love that there? I love the comment from the journalist that this requires a little bit of trust. Like, do you think? I mean, I wonder how many of you would actually willingly get into one of these cars if it pulled up right now. But I mean, that's just one example of what we're seeing happen in machine learning and AI in the automotive space. Of course, from a healthcare perspective, it's been amazing watching the same technology being rolled out over the last little while. In fact, I've spent the last 4 or 5 months, doing some deep research and work in the dental space, and working with dentists, looking at what's happening with AI in that whole industry is absolutely fascinating. In fact, a couple of examples of what I've been tracking. This company called Dental X-Ray, which is a company based in Germany that's actually using AI to do rapid scans of X-rays to identify issues for pathology that would otherwise take humans a long time to get through just from a processing perspective. In fact, have a quick look at what they're doing with Dental X-Ray in the dentistry space right now using machine learning. Let's have a quick look.
Hi, I'm Felix, the CEO and co-founder of Dental X-Ray. We developed an AI software for analyzing dental X-ray images, so we are able to detect pathologies and restorations on all common dental X-ray modalities. We integrate with the dental practice and offer the dentist support in analyzing the X-ray image and finding the right treatment planning.
Currently, many dentists are using our solution. It's making their lives easier every day, and which is great because they have much more time to spend on their patients, and we take off the things that they shouldn't be focusing on.
So there's a lot happening in terms of the use of AI to streamline back-end processes for health practitioners, but also from, I guess, a preemptive diagnostics perspective, what's happening here is truly awesome. In fact, again, looking in the dental space, one of the companies I've been watching of late is one called Vigilant Biosciences. And this company is extraordinary. They're using AI to look for a series of biomarkers for early stage oral cancers long before there is any indication that a cancer is developing. In fact, there's been some great research looking at this sort of technology and just how it is the future of not just what we're seeing happen in dentistry, but across the whole board of pathology and diagnostics. In fact, here's a QR code with a link to that research. I encourage you to have a look at this, because what we're seeing happen with machine learning and AI right now in this space is incredible. So that's the first tidal trend, is around the use of AI and machine learning. Now, of course, the second tidal trend is somewhat linked, because the thing that underpins our ability to use AI is massive and usable, keyword is usable, data sets. And that's the second tidal trend to really keep a close eye on over the next little while, is going to be around the dominance of data, just how important data is. And of course, we've got more usable data now than ever before. And a big part of what's driving that is often referred to as like the Internet of Things. The fact that every device we're using is churning out data, which if we're paying attention can be incredibly valuable. Now, I was doing some work a little while back with a company that many of you would know very well named Biogen. Now, Biogen, of course, their main areas in the whole area of cognitive decline, medications in that space. And they were telling me they had just signed a deal with Apple to data share with Apple. I mean, the privacy implications are interesting of this stuff, but what it allows them to do is actually monitor the way people use things like an iPhone or an iPad, any iDevice, an Apple device, because what they're finding is you can actually, over time, using this data, monitor and see minute changes in the way people tap, type, the way they swipe, the speed with which they do things on those devices can actually become early indications of cognitive decline. Again, before there's any indication otherwise or any symptoms of cognitive decline, allowing you to get in early and actually get in with some of the sort of treatments that can actually really make a difference. Now, working in the aged care sector over the last few months, I've been amazed to see it's not just about smartphones and smart watches, it's also about smart flooring, smart carpets. In fact, the use of this technology is incredible. This is smart flooring that will measure and monitor how people walk. And it'll actually identify subtle changes in people's walking style or gait over time particularly for elderly patients, to identify if those changes are actually signs that that person is at risk of a fall. But it's not just against smartphones or smart carpets. How about this in terms of the generation of data that has huge implications for health and healthcare and nutrition, and that is the development of what's referred to as the smart toilet. Now, if you haven't seen this or heard about this, you may want to have a quick look at this one. So this made a lot of noise this year at the CES event, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January, because this is one of the technologies that really captured people's attention. So the Toto Smart Toilet is a toilet that uses, again, AI to monitor human waste. And what it'll look for in your waste is anything that you're missing, so key nutrients or minerals that you may need in your diet. And their stated goal, get this, their stated goal is to get to a point where your weekly shopping list at the grocery store is informed by your toilet, based on what you may be lacking in your diet. Right? I don't know how you feel about that as a trend, but it gives you a sense of just, again, how rapidly these technologies are changing just day-to-day life for all of us in some ways we're going to see play out very practically in the years ahead. Now, the third tidal trend, this is going to be a really interesting one to watch, and I'm guessing you've seen elements of this one already, is in what's often referred to as the rise of synthetic reality. Now, synthetic reality is the overarching or the umbrella term to describe what's referred to as virtual reality or augmented reality. Now, those two things are subtly different. So virtual reality is where you put on like a headset and escape to another reality entirely, whereas augmented reality is something you put over your view of the world, be it a set of glasses or you hold your phone up to the world around you and content gets loaded onto that screen. And we're seeing in the whole space of augmented reality some incredible stuff happening right now. In fact, we saw 3 or 4 weeks ago, Google announce the prototype of what's referred to as the Google XR glasses. Now, these are amazing. These are glasses that allow you to, if you're wearing them, be speaking to someone in a different language and actually have their language and what they're saying translated in real time, projected onto the screen of the glasses as you're looking at the person you're speaking to. So this is almost like, subtitles for everyday life. And so the potential of this technology is like truly extraordinary. And you're looking at a lot of players who are moving into this space. In fact, a little bit of a pre-warning. Apple, later this year or early next year, are planning to bring out a set of glasses. Their goal is within a decade to actually take the place of our smartphones, to take the place of iPhones. So the Apple are really focusing right now on augmented reality, and they're dropping a few hints at the moment about what they're going to launch in this space. So this whole area is definitely one to watch. But while I think smart glasses are useful and a good example of what we're going to see really happen in this space, what happens when you don't actually need a set of glasses or goggles to engage in virtual or augmented reality? And this is like the holy grail of augmented reality. And if there's a company I've been watching who are doing really clever stuff in this regard, if you haven't heard of them, you may want to check them out. They're called Mojo Vision. So Mojo Vision have been working for a couple of years now on developing smart contact lenses that have little displays over the contact lens surface. So as you're wearing these contact lenses, images and information and data gets projected over the surface of your eyeball rather than you needing a set of glasses or an iPhone to hold up to the world around you. And I want to show you a video in a few moments of what we're seeing happen in this space. And you think about the potential for this just in everyday life, but particularly from a healthcare standpoint. Let's have a quick look up here on the screen.
Imagine if we could replace our screens with something that informs without distraction. Could we see differently, more clearly? Could it help us find that invisible edge when we need it most? Or allow us to connect in crucial moments, providing vital information in an instant? Introducing Mojo Lens, the world's first augmented reality smart contact lens.
Mojo's invisible computing solution will be a platform that gives you everyday superpowers and an invisible edge throughout your day. But before it does any of that, it first has to be a great contact lens that improves your natural vision even when it's off. Mojo Lens built-in display will give you augmented reality wherever you look.
From being able to see in the dark or low-light situations, to augmenting your memory with instant information, showing you real-time translations, or giving you a virtual teleprompter.
Now, some of you will probably wish in a couple of hours that you had one of these sets of contact lenses when you go for the lunch break and you see like a colleague in the distance, you're like, I know their name and I just cannot think of it. One day, Mojo Vision may well save all those awkward moments where you have forgotten someone's name entirely, because it'll tell you over the surface of your eye what their name is. But you would have seen in that little video some examples there of this from a healthcare perspective. So frontline responders being able to identify someone at a scene of an accident, for instance, and know the person's name, details, their blood type, just simple things that can really help in providing care that is far more personalised and targeted. Now, of course, again, the privacy issues with this stuff are significant, but the potential is also massive. If we look at what's happening right now in terms of the use of synthetic reality, particularly virtual reality from a healthcare standpoint, throughout the pandemic, this has been a really interesting trend to watch. In fact, early on in the pandemic at Imperial College Hospital in London, we saw some examples of the world's first surgeries being done using virtual reality goggles and robotic surgery actually to do this at a distance from the patient, because the patient was COVID positive in some of these instances. So the surgeon will be wearing the Microsoft HoloLens glasses and using that as a platform to actually do the surgery from a distance. We've seen some other examples of this throughout the course of the pandemic, and I think this is certainly one trend to watch over the next little while, because suddenly you can have a patient anywhere in the world, and as long as they've got a robotic surgical device to do the actual surgery, the best surgeon, the most trained, skilled surgeon in that area can be operating a country or a continent away and doing the surgery by virtual reality. I mean, the mind boggles when you consider just the potential for this technology. But also from a training standpoint, this is really interesting too. And a few of my clients are in the robotic surgery space, and working with these robotic surgery companies, they're actually now using virtual reality for a lot of the training. So for instance, a company named Osso VR is worth checking out. So they're actually creating platforms that allow surgeons or doctors to actually use virtual reality to do training and get familiar with new surgical devices. And they can do a surgery hundreds of times, of course, without actually having had a physical patient in the room by using virtual reality. And the results of this stuff are truly remarkable. But if we just put all of, I guess, the surgical part aside and stop looking at the procedures themselves and come back to the patient, this is where things get really cool. Because what we're seeing happen with virtual reality and augmented reality, keeping the patient front and center in everything we do and everything we think, it's really interesting. In fact, one company I've been watching for a couple of years now, if you haven't heard of them, you may want to have a quick look at them, a company called Applied VR. What they are developing, I love this, they're actually developing virtual reality experiences for people in hospital settings who are anxious or who are going to have to go through painful procedures, and they want to essentially escape the hospital environment for a few moments while the procedure's going on. And this is being used extensively right now in a lot of children's hospitals. So Los Angeles Children's Hospital in California have been using this for the last 2 or 3 years, and the results are incredible. In fact, they've found about 65% of people who use Applied VR as they're going through procedures or in a hospital setting have a reduction in their perceived pain of 30% or more. So some amazing examples of this technology, again, coming back to the patient experience and keeping that front of mind. And that's such an important theme. As we talk about the future and technology, how do we make sure we keep the human stuff the most important thing? And I guess as we talk about the new humanity, I think this is the most important discussion we've got to have, not just in healthcare, but across the board. How do we make sure these technologies support us to be more human? In fact, I love this insight, and if you haven't heard this quote, it's one of those beautiful quotes that summarizes the future of the labor market, because we've all heard about the algorithms and robots are going to take out scores of jobs and professions in the years to come, and some professions will radically change because of AI and automation. But ideally, what this is going to allow is for the human side to become more important than ever. And this quote is from Manoush Shafiq, who's the director of the London School of Economics, and here's what she said: in the past, jobs were about muscle. You had to physically be able to do something. She said, right now they're about brains. You've got to be cognitively able to do a role. In the future, the jobs that will matter, and this is going to be especially key in healthcare, jobs are going to be about heart. Using those uniquely human traits, because a robot might be able to do a surgery, for instance. You can actually automate caregiving perhaps, but you can't actually automate caring because machines haven't got a soul. There's not that sense, that ability to empathize, to use intuition and judgment. And you would all very well know that, in most clinical settings, it's not the logical things that you need to pay attention to, it's the gut intuition, when you get a sense of where a patient's at and what they actually need, even though the data may be telling you something otherwise. So I think what we're going to see is AI will take a lot of functions out of healthcare, but what it's going to mean is the things it can't do, which are the human things, will matter more than ever. So bearing in mind all of these sort of tidal trends that will shape the next few years, how do we make sure we're ready for the future? And that's what I want to spend the last few minutes we've got together looking at. And as I'm working with industries that are gearing up well for change now, I'll put it to you that the organizations that are getting ready for the future best are the ones who realize that right now they need to be thinking progress and not precedent. And just how important this is as a principle. And it's interesting, of course, as we come out of the pandemic, I'm sort of seeing two broad mindsets when it comes to people thinking about the future and planning for the future. You've got some people for whom like that, they'll say that everything has changed because of COVID-19. Nothing will ever go back to the way it was. To which I'm like, I'm not so sure that's true. I think there are some fundamental elements of human nature that haven't changed. I mean, conferences, we want to be back together with our colleagues. I mean, Zoom has been great, but I tell you what, there's nothing like being back together in a room. We're created to be together as human beings. We're tribal in that sense. So I don't think everything has changed. But I think the opposite mentality, and I see this a lot with clients right now, and I see this, by the way, a lot in the healthcare space, is this idea that really nothing's actually changed. And once everything simmers down after the pandemic, we'll sort of go back to the way things were. And there's such a danger in that mentality. And I'm guessing many of you would be very well familiar with this quote here from Einstein. Einstein was famous for saying that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get a different result. We know that quote. It's almost a cliche these days. But can I put it to you, if Einstein was defining insanity today, in 2022, based on the time of turmoil that we've just been through, I have a suspicion he would define insanity today the opposite way to what we see on the screen behind me here. I think he'd say, you know what, today, it's insane to be doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get the same result. Now, follow me here. What I mean by this is, if you're using the same techniques, the same approaches, the same back-end systems to do daily life from a healthcare perspective that you were using 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, expecting them to be as effective as they were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, you're going to be sorely mistaken. I mean, it doesn't matter how best practiced those approaches or techniques were, the pace of change means that we can never stand still for long. It is insane to think those things will just keep working as times change. And the challenge, of course, is, I mean, as humans, we love to do the same things over and over again. I mean, there's a reason as humans we're called creatures of habit. We love precedent. We love doing things the way we've always done them. I mean, there's such a danger in that if we're going to be ready for the future. We can't just slip into those modes of just doing things the way it's always been done. And what I've loved looking at over recent years is organizations that have gone to great lengths to try and really move away from precedent and focus on progress. One of my favorite case studies of this is a company you may well be familiar with named Oricon. So Oricon are a global design and engineering firm. And a few years ago, they realized they were getting to a point where they were getting stuck. They were tradition bound. And they realized they needed to change, they needed to innovate, but they weren't innovating fast enough. I mean, it was a company full of engineers who were really good at systems and process, but not creativity and innovation necessarily. And so you'll love this. The leadership team had an idea. Their idea was to start an initiative, a program called the Dumb Things We Do initiative. And what they said to their staff globally is they said, we'd love you to anonymously share with us what are the things we do that you think that are just a little bit dumb, that don't make sense, that aren't cutting edge, that are no longer fit for purpose, that need to be innovated. And I don't think the leadership team really knew what they were asking for. Like the floodgates opened. There were hundreds and hundreds of ideas that were suggested from their team members. And it took some humility for those leaders to sort of take some of this on board, because a few of the ideas suggested were things those leaders had put in place 8 or 9 years ago. And they had to have the humility to go, you know what, maybe it was best practice then, but it no longer is. And the leadership team took these hundreds of ideas and they sort of condensed them down to a top 100 list. And here's what they said. They said to the team, thanks for engaging in this process. Here's our commitment to you. In 100 days, we'll fix or get rid of every one of these 100 things. And they did it. It was a massive undertaking. In fact, I was interviewing one of the guys who was a leadership team member at Oricon at the time, a few months ago, a guy named John McGuire, who said this. He said, this whole Dumb Things We Do initiative radically changed the company. And we talked about innovation for years, but until there was a specific process for doing it, We were just consistently going back to precedent as opposed to thinking of different ways to do things. And now what's interesting is they went from being tradition bound and getting stuck in the past to being voted 3 years later the most innovative engineering company across the board. Massive change in their corporate culture and mindset because of this initiative. And so there's value in going to the organization, to the employees and saying, what are your ideas? What do we need to do to make sure we stay at the cutting edge? You'll be amazed the ideas they come back with. But can I also put it to you, the very best asset anyone has got in any team for innovation is the person on that team who's got the freshest eyes. Someone who's new. This is the beauty of people with fresh eyes, is they don't know how things have always been done. They don't know what the precedent is yet. So they come in and they'll ask questions. They'll ask questions like, why do we do it that way? Why do we do it at all? And can I put it to you, those questions from someone with fresh eyes can be an absolute gift when it comes to innovation, because it causes us to step back and go, that's a good question. I don't know why we do it that way. We just have for as long as I can remember. Now, I love this student's exam response here as a case in point of, someone with fresh eyes having no trouble thinking outside the box and seeing something that all the experts had missed. And of course, some teachers will tell you this is not called fresh eyes, this is called smart something else, okay? But like it makes the point. When you look at things from a different perspective, you see things that all those who've been around it for a long time will otherwise just miss. And to this very point, I love the insight from a guy named Alan Kay, who was one of the founding fathers of modern computing. And he was famous for saying this. He said, a change in perspective is worth 80 IQ points. See, for most of us, the challenges we're facing in our roles, in our practices, in our hospitals, to overcome and to solve these problems, we don't need to read another book or go to another seminar necessarily. We don't need to learn more. Often what we need is to take a step back and a step sideways, to see it from a different perspective, or to leverage the insights of those because they've got fresh eyes who see things differently. That's where the most powerful innovations will come from. And it's those innovations that will allow us to be future fit and more focused on progress than precedent. We're almost out of time. What I will do though before we finish up, I'll just pop my details up on the screen here. Feel free to have a look at my website. There's a whole pile of resources on there that could be useful. There's a whole video channel on my site with just short clips that build on a few of the things we've talked about today. So feel free to have a look at that if that will be of value. That QR code is for my LinkedIn profile. So if you spend a bit of time on LinkedIn, by all means, reach out, scan that QR code, reach out, connect. Every morning I put an update up with whatever's happened overnight. So any new trends or data or technology that's been announced, I'll do a quick update every morning on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out, connect there on LinkedIn and keep an eye out every morning for those updates. The last thing before we finish up, and I'll hand back, is we had a book come out a few months ago looking at this whole question of what are the trends that have sped up because of COVID. And we looked at 3 titled trends there in this pretty short session today. In the book there's 10. And I would say from a healthcare standpoint, there'd be probably 6 or 7 of these trends that are super relevant as you look at the next few years. Now, this is not like a printed book. It's not in bookstores. It's an ebook, a digital book. So feel free to have a look for that online wherever you get ebooks from. One of the things we've arranged from the publisher's perspective is actually to make this available at half what Kindle charge for the book for anyone who's at a live event. So if you want to get a copy of this book to be able to share with your colleagues, that QR code there will take you to a link where you can actually get that at half the price what Kindle charge. So feel free to have a look at that. I would just say download this, share it with your colleagues, and just to start this conversation about, what is the new humanity? What is the future going to look like? And how do we make sure we're ready for it? Now, as we finish up this time together this morning, I just wanted to call out what I think is the most natural instinct thing for most of us right now, which is this desire to get back to normal. And you hear that so often right now. Isn't it nice? Things feel like they're getting back to normal. Everyone's out and about. They're in restaurants and traveling, seeing family. Isn't it nice? And it's lovely. I get that. But there's also a danger in being in too much of a rush to get back to normal. In fact, I read some great commentary a little while back from a telecommunications executive, a woman named Alex Badenoch, who put it well. She said, if our ambition is to just get back to normal, we need to be careful because we might miss the moment. And the opportunity in front of all of us right now to do things differently, to change as a result of this pandemic. I mean, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Let's not waste the opportunity, the learnings we've had over the last 2.5 years, and just being too much of a rush to get back to the way things were just because it's safe and predictable. So I hope that has been useful. Thank you again for the invitation. Great to be able to spend a bit of time with you this morning. Enjoy your day together, and I look forward to staying in touch. Thanks so much. Cheers.